Okay. Part 3. Margayya went straight to the town bank. He refused to transact his business at the counter. He had to do it sitting in a chair in the manager's room. But he found someone talking to the manager and he had to wait outside for a moment. It was a crowded hour. Margayya never liked to do his transactions through the counter window. He despised the clerks. It was a sign of prestige for a businessman to get things done in a bank without standing at the little window. That was for the little fellows who had no current account but only a savings bank book. He had the greatest contempt for savings bank operations, putting in money as if into a child's money box and withdrawing no more than 50 rupees a week or some miserable amount, not through checks but by writing on those pitiful withdrawal forms. Having a current account seemed to him a stamp of superiority, and a man who had two accounts, account number 1 and account number 2, was a person of eminence. He saw waiting at the counters petty merchants, office messengers, and a couple of students of the Albert College attempting to cash checks from their parents. Hearing their inquiries, Margayya felt, why do their parents send these boys checks which they won't know how to cash? He thought, what do these people know of checks? What do they know of money? They are ignorant folk who do not know the worth of money, and think that it is just something to pass into a shop. Fools! He pitied them. He felt that he must do something to enlighten their minds. He would not be a banker to them, but a helper, a sort of money doctor who would help people to use their money properly with the respect due to it. He would educate society anew in all these matters. He hoped he would be able to draw away all these people into his own establishment when the time came. The 101. Reason why people came here was that they were attracted by the burnished counters, the heavy ledgers, the clerks sitting on high stools and so on, and, of course, the calling bells and pin cushions. Once again show, mere show. Showiness was becoming the real curse of all business these days, he thought. It was not necessary to have anything more than a box for carrying on any business soundly. Not necessary to have too many persons or tables or leather-bound ledgers. All that was required was just one head and a small notebook in which to note down figures if they became too complicated, and above all a scheme. He knew that he had a scheme somewhere at the back of his mind, a scheme which would place him among the elect in society, which would make people flock to him and look to him for guidance, advice and management. He could not yet say what the scheme would be, but he sensed its presence, being a financial mystic. Whatever it was going to revolutionize his life and the life of his fellow men. He felt he ought to wait on that inspiration with reverence and watchfulness. A peon came up to say, "The manager is free." "All right, I'll be coming," said Margayya. He liked to give an impression that he was in no hurry to run into the manager's room at his call. He looked through some papers in his pocket, folded and put them back, and sauntered into the manager's room. The manager was a very curt, businesslike gentleman who had recently been transferred to this branch. "Sit down, please. What can I do for you?" he asked. He was a man soured by constant contact with people who came to ask for overdrafts or loans on insufficient security. The moment he heard a footstep approaching, he first prepared himself to repel any demand. So, according to his custom, he put himself behind a forbidding exterior for a moment, and assumed a monosyllabic attitude. "I wish to open an account," said Margayya. The manager could not take it in easily at first. He still had his suspicions. This man might be anybody. Might have come to open an account or to open the safe. This hostility affected Margayya too. He said at once, "You don't seem to want a new client." "If that is so," he pretended to rise. "Sit down please," said the other. We have instructions not to admit too many new accounts, but I should like to know, you would like to know whether I am a bankrupt or what? All. 102. Right. I am not anxious to have an account here. I want it here because it is quite near to my own business place. Where is it? You will know it presently. Really? What business? Margaya would not answer this question. The more the other pressed for an answer, the more he resisted. Let me tell you this, it is a very specialized business. My clients are chiefly peasants from the villages. I have a great deal to do with their harvests and advances and so forth. To further inquiries by the manager, Margaya refused to give an answer. I cannot give any details of my business at the moment to you or to anyone. No one will be able to get these things out of me. But let me tell you, I have come here only to deposit my money and use it, not to take money out of you. I can quite see what is at the back of your mind. Now tell me whether you would care to have my account here or not. Now he was taking out his trump, namely, the check given to him by law. If you don't want me here, give me cash for it. But if you think I am good enough for you, start an account with this. Have you an account anywhere else? I don't answer that question, said Margaya out of sheer financial pugnacity. He could have told him that he had quite a sizable account in Commerce Bank in Race Course Road. The bank manager felt that here was a man who knew his mind and felt a regard for him. Of course I will open your account here, he said with sudden warmth. What does a bank exist for unless to serve its clients? Quite right, Margaya said. I quite appreciate, he said patronizingly, your precaution as a banker. Only a businessman can appreciate it in another businessman. He had a feeling that he had after all found the right place for himself in life, the right destination being 10 Market Road. It was a block of 4 shops, each about 12 feet square, with a narrow corridor running in front which was thrown in as a sort of grace to the tenants. The other 3 were taken by a tailor whose single machine went on rattling all day and night over the din of clients who came to demand their overdue clothes, and next to it was a board announcing itself as the Tourist Bureau. 103. Having a number of small chairs and a few benches, and a 4th shop was a doctor's, who claimed to have practiced under a great seer in the Himalayas and to be able to cure any disease with rare herbs. Margaya was pleased with this spot. It was a combination which seemed to him ideal. On the very first day he came there he felt that these were just the men with whom he could live. They are not people who are likely to interfere with my work. Moreover, it is likely that people who come to the tailor or the doctor or the tourist bureau are just the people who have some surplus cash and who are likely to be interested in my business too. It was Dr. Pal who put him into this setting. Dr. Pal sought him out one day at his house just as he was bullying his son over his lessons. He walked in saying, "I didn't know your house exactly, but just took a chance and came over. I was just sauntering down the road wondering whom to ask when I heard your voice." Margaya had a slate in his hand and there was a frown on his face and tears in his son's eyes. He got over his confusion and affected a smile. "Oh, doctor, what have you been doing with yourself?" The doctor looked at Baloo and said, "You have evidently been trying to teach this young man. Don't you know that for parents to teach their offspring is prohibited in all civilized countries?" He then said to the boy, as if taking charge of him immediately, "Now run off, little man." He turned ceremoniously to Margaya and added, "Of course with your permission." Baloo did not wait for any further concession. He swept aside his books and ran out of sight as if a bear were behind him. Margaya's mind had still not come to rest. He kept looking after his son and mumbled, You have no idea how indifferent and dull present-day boys are. Oh, no, don't tell me that. Remember correctly. Do you think you gave an easy time to your father or the teachers? Just think over it honestly. It was not a line which Margaya was prepared to pursue. He brushed aside the topic, remembering suddenly that he had not been sufficiently hospitable. He burst into sudden activity, and began to fuss elaborately over his visitor. He jumped to his feet, clutched the other's hand, and said, "Oh, doctor, what a pleasure to meet you after all these years. Where have you been all the time? What have you been doing with yourself? What is the meaning of cutting?" 104. Off old friends as you did? He unrolled a new mat, and apologized. "You know I have no sofa or chair to offer." "Well, I didn't come to be put on to a sofa." "That is right. I don't like furniture, the type of furniture which does not suit us. We are made to sit erect with our feet dangling." "I wonder," said Dr. Powell, "if the prevalence of nervous disorders in the present day might be due to the furniture which has become popular. In ancient days our ancestors squatted on the floor, stretched themselves as much as they liked and lived to be wise old men." Margaya could not understand whether the man was joking with him or was in earnest. He called his wife and said, "Get 2 cups of coffee ready immediately. My old friend has come." While waiting for coffee he said, "Now tell me what you have been doing with yourself, doctor. Where have you been hiding all these days?" The doctor said, "I had gone for a little training in tourism." Margaya was bewildered. This man was specializing in obscure and rare activities. "What is tourism?" he asked. "It is a branch of social activity," the doctor said. "The basic idea is that all people on Earth should be familiar with all parts of the Earth." Is it possible? It is not, and that is why there must be a specialist in tourism in every town and city. "What is tourism?" Margaya asked innocently once again. The doctor viewed him with pity and said, "I will explain to you all about it by and by one day when we meet in my office. Now tell me about yourself." "No, you tell me about yourself first," Margaya said, with a vague desire to avoid the theme of himself for the moment. There was at the back of his mind a faint fear lest the doctor should ask him to render the accounts of domestic harmony. He wondered if the man had hunted him down for this, and he wished to be on his guard. He had hardly made up his mind as to what he should say if he broached the subject, when, as if reading his thoughts, Powell said, "I came here some time ago, but didn't like to meet you lest you should think I had come after my book." Margaya sniggered and said somewhat pointlessly, "Oh, isn't it quite a long time since we met?" "Yes, ages since. I have been away for a long time. You know I." 105. "Am no longer on that paper. I gave it up. It did not seem to me serious enough work. I always feel that we must do something that contributes to the sum and substance of human experience. Otherwise all our jobs seem to be just futile. I also am about to start a new business." "Yes, I heard about it from the town bank manager," said Powell. The man seemed to know everything that was going on everywhere, thought Margaya with a certain amount of admiration. Margaya's wife brought 2 tumblers of coffee to the door of the kitchen and made some noise with the vessels in order to attract Margaya's attention. Margaya said from where he sat, "You can come in, it is my friend Dr. Powell. I have spoken to you about him." She was at once seized with fear whether the man was there in order to discuss another book on the same lines as the previous one. She withdrew a little, and Margaya went over and took the coffee from her hands and carried it to the front room. The conversation languished while Dr. Powell was relishing the coffee. and then he said, "I heard from the bank manager that you are starting a new business. I just came to tell you that if you want a nice place on Market Road, there is one vacant in our block. There is some demand for it." They went to 10 Market Road. Margaya liked the building when he saw it. A man who made a lot of money selling blankets had bought up the vacant site next to the municipal dispensary and built these rooms. At the moment, the house was of 1 story. Eventually, he proposed to add a first floor and a second floor. The man himself had his own shop in one of the back lanes of the market, a very small shop stacked with rough blankets. He was a strong dark man with a circular sandal paste mark on his forehead. He sat there all day chasing the flies. Flies come here, God knows why, Margaya reflected when he went to meet him with Dr. Pal. They had to stand outside the shop and talk to him as he peeped out of his blanket stacks. At the sight of Pal, the other man brought his palms together and saluted. He had evidently great reverence for learned people. "How are you, sir?" Dr. Pal inquired genially. "This is one of my greatest friends," he told Margaya in an aside, and added, "You cannot imagine how much he has helped me in my most difficult times." "Tut, tut," said the other from the depth of his woolen stacks. 106. This is not the place for you to start all that. Don't. Now who is this person you have brought with you? He is a friend of mine who wants to be your tenant. He is opening his business in a couple of days. Am I right? He asked, turning to Margaya. With a sheet of paper, Margaya fanned off the flies that were alighting on his nose. The man in the shop announced apologetically, "Oh, too many flies here." "What have flies to do here?" Margaya asked, unable to restrain his question anymore. The other replied, "They have nothing to interest them here, but behind this shop there is a jaggery go-down. There is a gap in the roof through which flies pass up and down. It is a great nuisance, and I have written to the municipality to get the jaggery shop moved somewhere else. But you know what our municipalities are." He is himself a municipal councillor for this ward, Dr. Pal added, and yet he finds so much difficulty in getting anything done. He had such trouble to get that vacant plot for himself. I applied for it like any other citizen, being a municipal council. Law doesn't mean that I should forego the ordinary rights and privileges of a citizen. The conversation went on with the sun beating down on their heads, and a feeling of still greater warmth was given by the sight of the heavy dark blankets all round. Margaya felt somewhat irritated that he was being made to stand in the sun all the time. He suddenly told himself, "I am a businessman with all my time fully booked. Why should I stand here in the sun and listen to this fellow's irrelevancies?" He told his friend somewhat sharply, "Shall we get on with the business?" Dr. Pal looked at him surprised for a moment and asked the blanket merchant, "Will you give the vacant shop to this gentleman?" "Of course," the other said. "If you want it, give it to him you choose." Dr. Pal turned to Margaya and said, "Take it." Margaya was unused to such brisk and straightforward transactions. He had always a notion that to get anything done one had to go in a roundabout manner and arrive at the point without the knowledge of the other party. Margaya rose to the occasion and asked, "What is the rent?" 75 rupees, said the other briefly. 107. 75. Rather high, isn't it? Margaya asked, hoping against hope there would be a reduction from this stern and businesslike man. "Yes, if it were any other place, but here the spot has market value. You can take it if you like, but if you are looking for a cheaper place," said the blanket man. "I shouldn't be here," said Margaya, finishing his sentence for him. I am taking it definitely from tomorrow. It pleased him very much to be able to speak up confidently in this manner. If it had been those horrible past days, he would have collapsed at the knees on hearing the amount of the rent. Dr. Powell said to the blanket seller, "This man is one of my oldest friends. I like him very much, you know." "Yes, I know," said the other. "I could guess so, otherwise you would not have brought him here. Here is the key." He held out a brass key for Dr. Powell to take. He asked Margaya, "What may be your line of business?" "Well, sort of banking," Margaya said without conviction, fearing at the word bank these people would at once visualize shining counters and all the gaudy ornamentation. "It'd be more simple to call it money lending," said the other. From within the blankets, "It is not merely lending," Margaya essayed to explain. "It is not so cheap as that. Also try to help people about money whenever they are in difficulties." Margaya started on his oration. "Money is..." He paused and turning to Dr. Powell, asked, "You have not told me your friend's name." It was more to put the other in his place. "Oh, we call him Guru Raj," Dr. Powell said. Margaya began his sentence again. "Guru Raj, money is the greatest factor in life and the most ill-used. People don't know how to tend it, how to manure it, how to water it, how to make it grow, and when to pluck its flowers and when to pluck its fruits. What most people now do is to try and eat the plant itself." The other roared with laughter. "I say, you seem to be a very great thinker. How well you speak, how well you have understood all these matters. You are indeed a rare man. Where have you been carrying on your business all these days?" "Mine is the sort of business that searches me out. I didn't have to move out of my house at all. But you see, it gives me no rest with so many people always coming in." 108. "You must never allow your business transactions to invade your home. That will simply shatter the home life," said Guru Raj. "I have a son studying in high school," said Margaya. He liked the feel of the word. Studying in high school, he felt very proud of Balu for the moment, but at the same time he felt a tinge of pity at heart. He had been too severe with him during the day. Oh, if children are studying, it will simply ruin their time to have visitors at all hours, the other said. After more such polite and agreeable talk, he said, "All right, sir, I wish you all success. May God help you. You may please to go now. I cannot offer you a seat in this wretched shop. It is my fate to sit here amidst the flies, and why should I bother you with them too? And it is not proper to make you stand. I will come and listen to your talk in your own shop, some day." It was midday and all the stalls in the market were dull and drowsy. Fruit sellers were dozing before their heaps. Some loafers were desultorily hanging about. Stray shop in which green plantain leaves were for sale. A seller of betel leaves held out a bundle saying, "Finest betel leaves, sir, flavored with camphor," applying the usual epithets that betel sellers employ for recommending their wares. Pal took some, haggled for a moment, and paid the price. He stuffed the bundle of betel leaves into his pocket. He stopped for a minute at the next stall to buy a yard of strung jasmine. "Excuse me," he said. "These are necessary to keep the peace at home. Necessary adjuncts for domestic harmony, you know." "Oh," Margaya exclaimed, and decided to ignore any special significance he might have put into the words domestic harmony. You are no longer alone? Margaya asked. No. Are you married? No. Are you going to be married? Not yet. Margaya was mystified. Where is your house? Are you still in that garden? No, no. I had to leave it long ago. Someone bought it, and has been farming on a large scale there. He cleared the place of all the weeds and undergrowth, which included me. But he appeared to be a nice man. I have been so far away and so busy. I have a house, I live in an outhouse in Lolly Extension. Someone else is in the main building. You must come to my house someday. They reached 10 Market Road, and at once Margaya was enchanted. He had always visualized that he would get some such place. The Malgudi gutter ran below his shop with a mild rumble and not so mild smell. But Margaya either did not notice or did not mind it, being used to it in his own home. Margaya's blood was completely the city man's and reveled in crowds, noise and bustle. The moment he looked out and saw the stream of people and traffic flowing up and down the road, he felt that he was in the right place. A poet would perhaps have felt exasperated by the continuous din, but to Margaya it was like a background music to his own thoughts. There was a row of offices and shops opposite, insurance agencies, local representatives of newspapers, hair-cutting saloons, some film distributors, a lawyer's chamber, and a hardware shop, into which hundreds of people were going every day. Margaya calculated that if he could at least filter 20 out of that number for his own pure poses, he would be more than well off. In about a year he could pass on to the grade of people who were wealthy and not merely rich. He drew a lot of distinction between the two. A rich man, according to his view, was just one caste below the man of wealth. Riches any hard-working fool could attain by some watchfulness, while acquiring wealth was an extraordinary specialized job. It came to persons who had on them the grace of the goddess fully and who could use their wits. He was a specialist in money and his mind always ran on lines of scientific inquiry whenever money came in question. He differentiated with great subtlety between money, riches, wealth, and fortune. It was most important people should not mistake one for the other. Next to the subject of money, the greatest burden on his mind was his son. As he sat in his shop and spoke to his clients, he started thinking of his son. The boy had failed in his matriculation exam, and that embittered him very much. He wondered what he should do with him now. Whenever he thought of it, his heart sank within him. God has blessed me with everything under the sun. I need not bother about anything else in life, but. He could not tell people, my son is only 15 and he has already 110. Passed into college. The son had passed that stage 2 years ago. 2 attempts and yet no good. Margaya had engaged 3 home tutors, 1 for every 2 subjects, and it cost him quite a lot in salaries. He arranged to have him fed specially with nutritive food during his examination periods. He bought a lot of fruits, and compelled his wife to prepare special food, always saying, "The poor boy is preparing for his examination. He must have enough stamina to stand the strain." He forbade his wife to speak loudly at home. Have you no consideration for the young man who is studying? He was in agonies on examination days. He escorted him up to the examination hall in Albert College. Before parting from him at the sounding of the bell, he always gave him advice. Don't get frightened. Write calmly and fearlessly. And don't come away before it is time. But all this was worth nothing because the boy had nothing to write after the first half hour. which he spent in scrawling fantastic designs on his answer book. He hated the excitement of an examination and was sullenly resentful of the fact that he was being put through a most unnecessary torment. He abruptly rose from his seat and went over to a restaurant nearby. His father had left with him a lot of cash in view of the trying times he was going through. He ate all the available things in the restaurant, bought a packet of cigarettes, sought a secluded corner away from the prying eyes of his elders on the bank of the river behind the college, sat down and smoked the entire packet, dozed for a while, and returned home at 5 in the evening. The moment he was sighted, his mother asked, "Have you written your examination well?" He made a wry face and said, "Leave me alone." He hated to be reminded of the examination, but they would not let him alone. His mother put before him milk, and fruits, and the special edibles she had made to sustain him in his ordeal. He made a wry face and said, "Take it away, I cannot eat anything." At this she made many sounds of sympathy and said that he must get over the strain by feeding himself properly. It was at this moment that his father returned home, after closing his office early, and hastening away in a jetka. All day as he counted money, his and other people's, a corner of his mind was busy with the examination. "Oh, God, please enlighten my son's mind so that he may answer and get good marks," he secretly prayed. The moment he saw his son, he said, "I am sure you have done very well, my boy." "How have you done?" The boy sat in a corner of the house with a cheerless look on his face. Margaya put it down to extreme strain and said soothingly, "You stayed in the hall throughout?" That was for him an indication of his son's performance. Whatever was the son's reply, he got the correct answer very soon, in less than 8 weeks, when the results came out. At first Margaya raved, "Balu has done very well, I know. Someone has been working off a grudge." Then he felt like striking his son, but restrained himself, for the son was 4 inches taller as he stood hanging his head with his back to the wall, and Margaya feared that he might retaliate. So he checked himself, and from a corner the mother watched. Boy was not interested in his studies and that he attached no value to them, but it was no use telling that to her husband. She pursued what seemed to her the best policy and allowed events to shape themselves. She knew that matters were coming to a conclusion now, and she was a helpless witness to a terrific struggle between 2 positive-minded men, for she no longer had any doubt that the son was a grown-up man. She covered her mouth with her fingers, and with her chin on her palms stood there silently watching. Margaya said, "Every little idiot has passed his SSLC exam. Are you such a complete fool?" "Don't abuse me, father," said the boy, whose voice had recently become gruff. It had lost, as his mother noticed, much of the original softness. The more she saw him, the more she was reminded of her own father in his younger days. Exactly the same features, the same gruffness, and the same severity. People had been afraid to speak to her father even when he was in the sweetest temper, for his face had a severity without any relation to his mood. She saw the same expression on the boy's face now. The boy's look was set and grim. His lips were black with cigarettes which she knew he smoked. He often smelled of them when he came home. But she kept this secret knoll edge to herself, since she didn't like to set up her husband against him. She understood that the best way to attain some peace of mind in life was to maintain silence. Ultimately, she found that things resolved themselves in the best manner possible or fizzed out. She found that it was only speech which made existence worse every time. Lately, after he had become affluent, she found that her husband showed excessive emphasis, rightly or wrongly, in all matters. She realized that he had come to believe that whatever he did was 100. Always right. She did her best not to contradict him. She felt that he strained himself too much in his profession, and that she ought not to add to his burden. So if he sometimes raved over the mismanagement of the household, she just did not try to tell him that it was otherwise. She served him his food silently, and he himself discovered later what was right and what was wrong and confessed it to her. Now more than in any other matter she practiced this principle where their son was concerned. She knew it would be no use telling her husband not to bother the son over his studies, that it would be no use asking him to return home at 7:30 each day to sit down to his books with his home teachers. He simply would not return home before 9. It was no use shouting at him for it. It only made one's throat smart and provided a scene for the people next door to witness. She left it all to resolve itself. Once or twice she attempted to tell the son to be more mindful of his father's wishes and orders, but he told her to shut up. She left him alone, and she left her husband alone. She attained thereby great tranquility in practical everyday life. Now she watched the trouble brewing between the two as if it all happened behind a glass screen. The father asked in a tone full of wrath, "How am I to hold up my head in public?" The boy looked up detached, as if it were a problem to be personally solved by the father, in which he was not involved. Margaya shouted again, "How am I to hold up my head in public? What will they think of me? What will they say of my son?" The boy spoke with a quiet firmness, as if expressing what immediately occurred to the mother herself. She felt at once a great admiration for him. He said in a gruff tone, "How is it their concern?" Margaya wrung his hands in despair and clenched his teeth. What the boy said seemed to be, "Son of mine, I cannot tolerate a son who brings such disgrace on the family." The boy was pained beyond words. "Don't talk nonsense, father," he said. Margaya was stupefied. He had no idea that the boy could speak so much. Talking till now was only a one-way business, and he had taken it for granted that the boy could say nothing for himself. He raved, "You are talking back to me, are you mad?" The boy burst into tears and wailed, "If you don't like me, send me out of the house." Margaya studied him with surprise. He had always thought of Balu as someone who was spoken to and never one who could speak with the same emphasis as himself. He was offended by the boy's aggressive manner. He was moved by the sight of the tears on his face. He was seized with a confusion of feelings. He found his eyes smarting with tears and felt ashamed of it before his son and before that stony-faced woman who stood at the doorway of the kitchen and relentlessly watched. Her eyes seemed to watch unwaveringly, with a fixed stare. So still was she that Margaya feared lest she should be in a cataleptic state. He now turned his wrath on her. "It's all your doing. You have been too lenient. You have spoilt him beyond redemption. You with your—" The boy checked his tears and interrupted him. "Mother has not spoiled me, nor anyone else. Why should anyone spoil me? There is too much talk in this house. That's what's wrong here," Margaya declared, and closed the incident by going in to change and attend to his other activities. The boy slunk away, out of sight. In that small house it was impossible to escape from one another, and the boy slipped out of the front door. The mother knew he would return, after his father had slept, bringing into the home the smell of cigarette smoke. Margaya stayed awake almost all night. When the boy sneaked back after his rounds and pushed the door open, it creaked slightly on its hinges and he at once demanded, "Who is there? Who is there?" Balu answered mildly, "It's myself, father." Margaya was pleased with the softening that now seemed to be evident in his tone, but he wished at the same time that the boy had not disgraced him by failing. He said, "You have been out so long?" "Yes," came the reply. "Where?" he asked. There was no further reply. Margaya felt that failing the matrix seemed to have conferred a new status on his son, and unloosened his tongue. He felt in all this medley a little pride at the fact that his son had acquired so much independence of thought and assertiveness. He somehow felt like keeping him in conversation and asked, with a slight trace of cajolery in his voice, "Was the door left open without the bolt being drawn?" "Yes," replied the boy from somewhere in the darkness. "That's very careless of your mother. Does she do it every day?" There was once again a pause and silence. His wife seemed to have fallen asleep too, for there was no response from her. He somehow did not wish the conversation to lapse. He said as a stopgap, "What'll happen if a thief gets in?" There was no response from the son. After blinking in the dark for a few minutes, Margaya asked, "Boy, are you asleep?" And the boy answered, "Yes, I am." And Margaya, feeling much more at peace with himself at heart for having spoken to him, fell asleep at once, forgetting for a few hours the matriculation examination and his other worries. They got into a sort of live and let live philosophy. He hoped that when the schools reopened he could put the boy back at school, prepare him intensively for his examination, and if necessary see some of the examiners and so on. Margaya had a feeling that he had of late neglected his duties in this direction. He had unqualified faith in contacting people and getting things done that way. He could get at anybody through Dr. Pal. That man had brought into his Busi nest a lot of people known to him. Margaya's contacts were now improving socially. People were indebted to him nowadays, and would do anything to retain his favor. Margaya hoped that if he exerted himself even slightly in the coming year he would see his son pull through matriculation without much difficulty. Of course the boy would have to keep up a show of at least studying the books and would have to write down his number correctly in the answer book and not merely scribble and look out of the door. It was extremely necessary that he should at least write 1 page of his answer and know what were the subjects he ought to study. Margaya felt that if he could persuade Baloo to make at least a minimum of effort for his own sake, his mind would be easier. He proposed it very gently to him about a fortnight later as they sat down to their dinner together. Margaya showed him extreme consideration nowadays. It was born out of fear and some amount of respect. The boy was always taciturn and grim. He recollected that it seemed ages since he had seen any relaxation in his face. He had a gravity beyond his years. That frightened Margaya, except the one instance when he saw tears in his eyes on the day of the results. He had always found him sullen. He hoped to soften him by kindness, or, at least, outward kindness, for he still smarted inside at the results of the examination. He looked for a moment at the face of his son and said, "Baloo, you must make another attempt. I'll see that you get through the examination without the least difficulty." 150. Baloo stopped eating and asked, "What do you mean, father?" Margaya sensed danger, but he had started the subject. He could not stop it now under any circumstances. So he said, "I mean about the matriculation examination." "I will not read again," said the boy defiantly. "I have already spoken to mother about it." "Hm." Margaya turned to his wife who was serving him and said, "He has spoken to you, has he?" "What has he said?" "Just what he has told you," she answered promptly, and went back to the fireplace to fetch something. "Why didn't you tell me about it?" Margaya asked, eagerly looking for some lapse on her part to justify him in letting off steam. She merely replied, "Because I knew he was going to tell you about it himself." Margaya burst out at her. "What do you mean by discussing all sorts of things with the boy and not telling me anything? These are matters His son interrupted him. "Father, if you hate me and want to make me miserable, you will bother me with examinations and studies." "I hate them." Margaya went on arguing with him all through the meal till the boy threatened to abandon his dinner and walk out of the dining room. Margaya assumed a sullen silence, but the atmosphere ached with tension. Everyone was aware that the silence was going to be broken in a violent manner next moment, as soon as dinner was over. Father and son seemed to be in a race to finish eating first. Baloo gobbled up his food and dashed to the backyard. He poured a little water on his hand, wiped it on a towel nearby and moved towards the street door. Margaya jumped up from his seat, with his hand unwashed, dashed to the street door and shut and bolted it. Frustrated, the boy stood still. Margaya asked, "Where are you going?" "I have still much to tell you. I have not finished speaking yet." The boy withdrew a few steps in response. Meanwhile his mother had brought in a vessel of water. Margaya snatched a moment to wash his hand at the little open yard. He said, "Wait," to his son. He opened his office box and brought from it the boy's SSLC register. He had secured it on the previous day from the headmaster of the school. The SSLC register is a small calico-bound notebook with columns marked in it, containing a record of a high school boy's marks, conduct, handwriting and physical fit. 116. Ness. Margaya had got the register from the headmaster and studied its pages keenly the whole of the previous day. Matters did not now appear to him so hopeless. The headmaster had marked fair, both for his handwriting and drill attendance. Margaya had no idea that his son could shine in anything, so this was an entirely happy surprise. His marks in almost all subjects were in single digits. The highest mark he had obtained was 12 out of 100 in hygiene, and he had maintained his place as the last in the class without a variation. One would have expected Margaya to be shocked by this, but the effect was unexpected. He was a fond and optimistic father, and he fastened on the 12 marks for hygiene. It seemed so high after all the diminutive marks the boy had obtained in other subjects. Margaya hoped that perhaps he was destined to be a doctor, and that was why his inclination was so marked for hygiene. What a wonderful opening seemed to be before him as a doctor. Dr. Baloo, it would be very nice indeed. If only he could get through the wretched SSLC barrier, he'd achieve great things in life. Margaya would see to it that he did so. Margaya's money and contacts would be worth nothing if he could not see his son through. He had prepared himself to speak to Baloo about all this gently and persuasively. He hoped to lead up to the subject with encouraging talk, starting with hygiene, and then to ask him if he wished to be a doctor. What a glorious life opened before a doctor! He would send him to England to study surgery. He could tell him all that and encourage him. Margaya had great faith in his own persuasiveness. He sometimes had before him a tough customer who insisted upon withdrawing all his deposits and winding up the account, a most truculent client. But Margaya remembered that if he had about an hour with him, he could always talk him out of it. The deposit would remain with him, plus any other money that the man possessed. Now Margaya wanted to employ his capacity for a similar purpose with his son. That's why he had come armed with the SSLC register. He could read out to him the headmaster's remarks, fair, etc., and prove to him how hopeful everything was if only he would agree to lend his name and spare time to go through the formality of an examination in the coming year. At the sight of the notebook the boy asked, "What is this? Why have you brought it from school?" As if it were the most repulsive article he had seen in the whole of his life. His face went a shade 117 darker. It symbolized for him all the wrongs that he had suffered in his life. It was a chronicle of all the insults that had been heaped upon him by an ungracious world, a world of schools, studies and examinations. What did they mean by all this terrible torment invented for young men? It had been an agony for him every time the headmaster called him up and made him go through the entries and sign below. Such moments came near his conception of hell. Hell, in his view, was a place where a torturing God sat up with your scholastic record in his hand and lectured you on how to make good and told you what a disgrace you were to society. His bitterness overwhelmed him suddenly, as his father opened a page and started, "Here is your hygiene." The boy made a dash for the book, snatched it from his father's hand before he knew what was happening, tore its entire bulk into 4 pieces. It had been made of thick ledger paper and only his fury gave him the necessary strength to tear it up at one effort, and ran out into the street and threw the pieces into the gutter. And Vinayak Mudali Street gutter closed on it and carried the bits out of sight. Margaya ran up and stood on the edge of the gutter woefully looking into its dark depth. His wife was behind him. He was too stunned to say anything. When he saw the last shred of it gone, he turned to his wife and said, "They will not admit him in any school again, the last chance gone." And then he turned to tackle his son, but the boy had gone. The only sign of prosperity about him now was the bright handle of the umbrella which was hooked to his right forearm whenever he went out. He was a lover of umbrellas, and the moment he could buy anything that caught his fancy, he spent 8 rupees and purchased this bright-handled umbrella with German ribs, in the parlance of the umbrella dealers. Hitherto he had carried for years an old bamboo one, a podgy thing with discolored cloth which had been patched up over and over again. He protected it like his life for several years. He had his own technique of holding an umbrella which assured it a long lease of life and kept it free from fractures. He never twisted the handle when he held an umbrella over his head. He never lent it to anyone. Margaya, if he saw anyone going out in the rain in imminent danger of catching and perishing of pneumonia, would let him face his fate rather than offer him the 118 protection of his umbrella. He felt furious when people thought that they could ask for an umbrella. "They will be asking for my skin next," he often commented when his wife found fault with him for his attitude. Another argument he advanced was, "Do people ask for each other's wives? Don't they manage to have one for themselves? Why shouldn't each person in the country buy his own umbrella? An umbrella does not like to be handled by more than one person in its lifetime," he often declared, and stuck to it. He had to put away his old umbrella in the loft, carefully rolled up, because its ribs had become too rickety and it could not maintain its shape any longer. It began to look like a shot-down crow with broken wings. Though for years he had not noticed it, suddenly one day when he was working under the tree in the cooperative bank compound, someone remarked that he was looking like a wayside umbrella repairer and that he had better throw it away. He felt piqued and threw it in the loft, but he could never bring himself to the point of buying a new one and had more or less resigned himself to basking in the sun. Until the time came when he could spend 8 rupees without calculating whether he was a loser or a gainer in the bargain. That time had come, now that thousands of rupees were passing through his hands, thousands which belonged to others as well as to him. Except for this umbrella, he gave no outward sign of his affluence. He hated any perceptible signs of improvement. He walked to his office every day. His coat was of spun silk, but he chose a shade that approximated to the one he had worn for years so that no one might notice the difference. He whitewashed the walls of his house inside only, and built a small room upstairs. He bought no furniture except a canvas deck chair at a second-hand shop. On this he lounged in, looked at the sky from his courtyard. He told his wife to buy any clothes she liked, but she was more or less in mourning and made no use of the offer. She merely said, "Tell me about Baloo. That is what I need, not clothes." Margaya replied, "Well, I can only offer you what is available. If you are crying for the moon, I can't help you much there. I am asking for my son, not crying for the moon," she said. She was always on the verge of hysteria nowadays. She spoke very little and ate very little, and Margaya felt that at a time when he had a right to have a happy and bright home, he was being denied the privilege unnecessarily. He felt angry with his wife. He felt that it was her sulking which ruined the atmosphere of the home. They had so much accustomed themselves to the disappearance of their son that he ceased to think of it as a primary cause. The more immediate reasons became perceptible. He tried in his own clumsy manner to make her happy. He told her, "Ask for any money you want." "What shall I do with money?" she said. "I have no use for it." He disliked her for making such a statement. It was in the nature of a seditious speech. He merely frowned at her and went on with his business. What was that business? When at home he carried about him the day's financial position finely distilled into a statement, and was absorbed in studying the figures. When he wanted relaxation he bought a paper and went through its pages. Nowadays he did not borrow the paper from the newspaper dealer but subscribed for a copy himself. He read with avidity what was happening in the world. The speeches of statesmen, the ravings of radicals, the program for this and that, war news, and above all the stocks and shares market. He glanced through all this because a certain amount of world information seemed to be an essential part of his equipment when he sat in his office. All kinds of people came in and it was necessary that he should be able to take part in their conversation. To impress his clients, he had to appear as a man of all-round wisdom. He walked to his work every day soon after his morning meal. The house was in suspense till he was seen safely off. He did not believe in employing servants at home, and so his wife had to do all the work. He often said, "Why should we burden ourselves with servants when we are like a couple of newlyweds? Ours is not a very big family." The lady accepted it meekly because she knew it would not be much use arguing it out with Margaya. She knew, as he himself did, that he did not employ a cook because he did not like to spend money on one. But he was sure to give some other reason if he was asked. He would in all probability say, "Where's the need to show off?" She knew that he viewed money as something to accumulate and not to be spent on increasing one's luxuries in life. She knew all his idioms even before he uttered them. Sometimes when he saw her sitting at the fireplace, her eyes shrunken and swollen with the kitchen smoke, he felt uneasy and tried to help her with the kitchen work, keeping up the pretense of being newlyweds. He picked up a knife here and a green vegetable there, cut it up in a desultory manner, and vaguely asked, "Is there anything I can do?" She hardly ever answered such a question. She merely said, "Please come in half." 120. An hour, and I will serve you your meal. She had become very sullen and reserved nowadays. She brooded over her son Baloo night and day. She lost the taste for food. Margaya behaved wildly whenever he was reminded of their son. "He is not my son," he declared dramatically. "A boy who has an utter disregard for his father's feelings is no son. He is a curse that the gods have sent down for us. He is not my son." It all sounded very theatrical, but the feeling was also very real. When he remembered the floating bits of calico in the street gutter, he felt sorry that his son was no longer there to be slapped. His fingers itched to strike him. He reflected, If he had at least disappeared after receiving the slap I aimed, I would not have minded much. He discouraged his wife from mentioning their son again and had grandly ordered that the household must run on as if he had not been born. When he spoke in that tone, his wife fully understood that he meant it. His affluence, his bank balance, buoyed him up and made him bear the loss of their son. He lived in a sort of radiance which made it possible for him to put up with anything. When he sat at his desk from early in the day till sunset, he had to talk, counsel, wheedle out, and collect money. In fact, go through all the adventures of money-making. At the end of the day, as he walked back home, his mind was full of the final results, and so there was practically no time for him to brood over Baloo. Late at night, when the voices of the city had died down and when the expected sleep came a little late, he speculated on Baloo. Perhaps he had drowned himself. There was no news of him, although several days and weeks had passed. His wife accused him at first of being very callous and not doing anything about it. He did not know what was expected of him. He could not go and tell the police. He could not announce a reward for anyone who traced him. He could not. He hated to make a scene about it, and solved the whole thing by confiding in Dr. Pal. Dr. Pal had promised to keep an eye on the matter and tell him if anything turned up. No one could do more than that. Margaya had generally given out that his son had gone on a holiday to Bombay or Madras, and lightly added, "Young boys of his age must certainly go out by themselves and see a bit of the world. I think that's the best education." 121. But boys must have a minimum of SSLC, someone remarked. Margaya dismissed it as a foolish notion. What is there in matriculation? People can learn nothing in schools. I have no faith in our education. Who wants all this nonsense about a squared plus b squared? If a boy does not learn these, so much the better. To be frank, I have got on without learning the a squared and b squared business, and what is wrong with me? Boys must learn things in the rough school of life. Whatever he said sounded authoritative and mature nowadays, and people listened to him with respectful attention. These perorations he delivered as he sat in his office. His office consisted of a medium-sized room with 4 mattresses spread out on the floor. At the other end of it there was a sloping desk where an accountant sat. He was a lean old man, with a 15-day-old silver beard encircling his face at any given time. He was a pensioner, a retired revenue clerk, who wore a close coat and a turban when he came to the office. He was expected to arrive before Margaya. It pleased Margaya very much to see him at his scat, bent over his ledgers. He was instructed not to look up and salute when Margaya came in, since it was likely to disturb his calculations and waste his time. Margaya said, "I do not want all this formality of a greeting. I see you every day. If you want to please me, do your work and get on with it without wasting your time." But when he felt he needed an audience for his perorations, he addressed him and any other clerks who might be there. Margaya sat in one corner of the hall. He had a desk before him made of smooth polished wood which he had bought from the blanket merchant at a second-hand price. Margaya loved to gaze on its smooth, rippled grains, remnants of gorgeous designs that it had sequired as a tree trunk hieroglyphics containing the history of the tree. Whenever he gazed on it, he felt as if he were looking at a sky in some dream world. But what is the use of gazing on these and daydreaming? He told himself, sharply pulling his mind back. He lifted the lid and gazed inside, and there was the reality which he could touch and calculate and increase, a well-bound half. 122. Leather ledger, a bottle of red ink, a bottle of black ink, an oblong piece of blotting paper, and a pen the red holder of which his fingers had gripped for years now. And beside it was a small bag made of thick drill, into which went all the cash he collected. His clerk did not know what he collected each day. He did not look into the AC count book which Margaya kept, nor did he count the cash. It was all done by Margaya himself. He did not believe that it was necessary for anyone to share his knowledge of his finances. It was nobody's business but his own. The work that he gave the accountant was copying down the mortgages that were left with him by the vile loggers who came round for financial assistance. He not only kept the deeds, but put the old man to the task of copying them down entirely in a big ledger. He alone could say why he wanted this done, but he would not open his mouth about it to anyone. The old man was being paid 50 rupees a month, and he was afraid of being thrown out if he questioned too much. He just did his duty. At about 2 o'clock Margaya locked his safe box and got up saying, "I'm going out for tiffin, will be back in a minute. Look after the office, and keep anyone who may come here till I return." Margaya was always used to having a semicircle of persons sitting before him as in the old days, and never interrupted his studies or calculations to look at them or receive their greetings. He was a very busy man whose hours were valuable. As the day progressed it was a race with time, for he had to close his books before sunset. The owner of the house, the blanket dealer, did not like to waste money on installing electric lights. He went on dodging his tenants' appeals day after day. His excuse was that materials were not available in quantities he needed or at prices he was prepared to pay. He went on saying that he had sent a direct order to the General Electric in America, that he had business associates of his blanket contract days who would supply his wants direct, and that he was looking for a reply with every sailing, and thus he kept his tenants in hope. The plain fact seemed to be that he did not like to waste work and close the accounts before darkness fell. He worked without wasting a minute. One or two of his clients, who had waited long enough to catch his attention, cleared their throats and made other small sounds. Margaya suddenly looked up from his desk and told one of them, "Go there," pointing at his accountant, sitting at the other end of the hall. "He will give you the deed back." The other showed no sign of moving, at which he said sharply, "You heard me. If I have got to speak each sentence twice, I shall have to live for 200 years and be satisfied with a quarter of my present earnings." "Why do you say such harsh things, master?" the other asked. "Is it because I am asking for my deed back? Is it wrong?" "It is not wrong. Why should anyone refuse to give a title deed that is yours by right?" He said it in such a tone that the other hesitated and said, "You have been as a father to me in my difficulties, and you have helped me as much as you could. And yet you have not the grace to trust me with your title. Do you think I am going to make a broth of it and drink it off?" The client rose and said, "I will come again for it tomorrow, sir. Just to show that I am in no hurry." He rose and walked out. Margaya said to the others, "You see that fellow? The ingratitude of some of these folks sometimes makes me want to throw up everything in." The others made sympathetic sounds just to please him. His accountant added from his corner his own comment in his hollow, hungry voice. "He is afraid he may have further interest to pay if he leaves his papers here. I know these people. They are docile and lamb-like as long as they hold our money, but the moment they return the principal and interest." Margaya did not like this. "Don't disturb yourself, sastry, go on with your work." He hated the hungry, tired tone of his accountant. "I was only giving you a piece of observation. It is getting to be a nuisance. Some of these fellows demanding their papers back at short notice. Sastry persisted. At this Margaya realized that it would not be feasible to put his accountant down so easily, and cut him short with, "True, true. We must include a condition that they must give us at least 3 days for returning their papers." A visitor who felt that he had waited too long asked, "Margaya, don't you recognize me?" "No," replied Margaya promptly. "I am Kanda," he said. "Which? Of Somanor?" "No, you are not," replied Margaya promptly. The other laughed, leaned forward almost over the desk, and asked, "Do you still say that I am not Kanda, master?" Margaya scrutinized him closely and cried, "You, old thief, it is you, yes. What has come over you? You look like a man 100 years old. Why those wrinkles round your nose? Why those folds at the chin and that silver filing all over your face? What is the matter with you, and where are your teeth gone?" The other just raised his arms heavenward, lifted up his eyes as much as to say, "Go and put that question to the heavens if you like." Now Margaya wanted to clear his hall of all his visitors. He felt that here was the man he would like to talk to the whole day. He looked at the others, gave a paper back to someone, and said, "I cannot advance you on this." "Sir, please," he began. "Come tomorrow, we will sec. Now leave me, I have many important things to talk over with old Kanda." He had lost sight of Kanda years ago. Margaya had been very fond of this man, who always said that he preferred fluid cash to stagnant land and that it was more profitable to grow money out of land than corn. Kanda had now come to ask Margaya's advice on how best to get money out of some new lands which had unexpectedly come to him through the death of a relative. These lands were in the regions of Mempi, whose slopes were covered with teak and other forests, and at whose feet stretched acres and acres of maize fields, with stalks standing over a man's height. Margaya was carried away by visions of this paradise of blue mountains, forest, and green fields. It was wealth at the very source and not second-hand after it had traveled up to town. The more he listened to Kanda's petition, the more he felt that here was raw wealth inviting him to take a hand and help himself. Though it had grown nearly dark, he sat and listened to Kanda as he narrated to him his financial ups and downs. "I am glad you have come back to me, Kanda. I will pull you out of your difficulties," he said as he rose to go. Kanda explained, "I cannot get any more loans from the co-oper." 125. Ativ Bank. They have expelled me for default, although they opt on the pledges. "The crooks," Margaya muttered. "They are crooks, I tell you. I do not know why the government tolerates this institution. They should put in jail all the secretaries of cooperative societies." The picture of the secretary in a rule came back to him with all the old force. Margaya warned him, "Don't go near them again. They will see you ruined before they have done with you." "I will look after you," he added protectively, starting to lock up his door. He had sent away his accountant, and with a duplicate key he locked the door of his office. He generously indicated to Kanda the veranda. "Sleep here, Kanda, no one will object. I will see you tomorrow morning and then we will go and inspect your property at Mempi. What time is your bus?" "The first bus leaves the market square at 6 o'clock. "The next?" "It is at 8:30. 4 buses pass Mempi village every day," he said with a touch of pride. "So that you may come oftener into town and borrow, I suppose." "There is also a railway station, about 5 or 6 stones off," Kanda said. "From here you can get the evening train and be down there at about 12 o'clock. "And get eaten by tigers, I suppose," Margaya added, before reaching home. Kanda laughed at this piece of ignorance. Tigers are in the hills and generally do not come down. Even then I prefer to come with you by the morning bus, Margaya said. We will go by the second bus tomorrow. You can have your food in that hotel there. Margaya walked home. At his house he found a commotion. His wife's voice could be heard wailing, and a large crowd had gathered at his front door. He quickened his pace on seeing it. What is the matter? He asked someone nearby. He hoped the people were not rushing in order to loot the house. He had kept a few important documents in the front room and a lot of cash. Must remove it elsewhere, he thought as he pushed his way through the crowd on the front steps. Get out of the way, he thundered. What are you all doing here? Someone in the crowd said, Your lady is weeping. I see that. Why? They hesitated to speak. He gripped one nearby by his shirt collar and demanded, What has happened? Can't you speak? He shook him vigorously till he protested. Why do you trouble me, Margaya? I won't speak. Margaya let him go and went in. He saw his wife rolling on the floor and wailing, in a voice he had never heard before. He never knew that she had such a high-pitched voice. There were a number of women sitting round her and holding her. Margaya rushed towards them crying, What has happened to her? Meenakshi, what is the matter with you? She sat up on hearing his voice. Her hair was untied. Her eyes were swollen. She wailed, Baloo, Baloo. Her voice trailed off and she broke down again. She fell on the floor and rolled in anguish. Margaya felt helpless. He saw his brother and his wife also in the crowd. He knew something must be seriously the matter if these two were there, and their many children sucking their thumbs. His brother's wife was sitting beside Margaya's wife and trying to comfort her. Margaya rushed up and pleaded, Won't someone tell me what has happened? His brother pushed his way through the crowd and handed him a card. Margaya's eyes were blurred with the mist of perspiration. His excitement had sent his heart racing. He rubbed his eyes and gazed on the card. He couldn't read it. He groaned and fumbled for his glasses. He could not pull them out of his pocket easily. He gave the card to the one nearest him and cried, Can't someone read it? Is it an illiterate gathering? What are you all watching for? And then some person obliged him by reading out, Your son, Baloo, is no more. What? Who says so? Margaya cried, losing all control over himself. More perspiration streamed down his eyelids and he wept aloud. My son! My son! Am I dreaming? The assembly watched him in grim silence. His wife was sobbing. She suddenly shot towards Margaya and cried, It's all you're doing. You ruined him. Margaya was taken aback. There was a confused mixture of emotions now. He did not know what to say. One side of his mind went on piecing together his son's picture as he had last seen him. Did I treat him too harshly over the examination results? Or have I been too thoughtless over that cursed school record? He felt angry at the thought of examinations. They were a curse on the youth of the nation, the very greatest menace that the British had brought with them to India. If he could see his son now, he would tell him, Forget all about schools and books. You just do as you like, just be seen about the house, that's sufficient for us. In this din, his wife's accusation reached him but faintly. He retorted, What are you saying, you poor creature? What are you trying to say? You and your schools. She arraigned him, but for your obsession and tyranny. You keep quiet, he said angrily. He turned round to someone and inquired, Do you know how it happened? Several voices chorused. He fell off a fourth floor of a building in Madras. He must have been run over in that city, probably. Caught cholera. We don't know who was with him, asked Margaya. He conducted a ruthless cross-examination. How can we know the card is signed by a friend? Friend, friend, Margaya cried. What sort of friend is it? Friend, useless blackguard. He did not know what he was saying, nor could he check the rush of his words. He babbled as if under the influence of a drug. He saw the whole house reeling in front of his eyes, the surroundings darkened, and he sat down unable to bear the strain. He sat on the floor, with his head between his hands, quietly sobbing. His brother sidled up, put his arm round him, and said, "You must bear it, brother. You must bear it." "What else can I do?" Margaya asked like a child. He still had on his coat and turban. Through all his grief, a ridiculous question, addressed to his brother, kept coming to his mind. Are we friends now, no longer enemies? What about our feud? A part of his mind kept wondering how they could live as friends, but the numerous problems connected with this seemed insoluble. We had got used to this kind of life. Now I suppose we shall have to visit each other and inquire and so on. All that seemed to be impossible to do. He wished to tell him then and there. Don't let this become an excuse to change our present relationship. Margaya did his best to suppress all these thoughts, but they kept bothering him till he could say nothing, till he was afraid to open his lips lest he should blurt them out. His brother whispered, among other things, "We will send you the night meal from our house." "No, we don't want any food tonight," Margaya said. "Please send all those people away." He was indignant, because Baloo was 128. Dead. Why should this crowd imagine that the house was theirs? "Shut and bolt the door," he thundered. His brother left him, went up to the strangers about the house and appealed to them to leave. He said, with his palms pressed together in deference, "Please leave us. This is the time when the family has to be together." "No," Margaya thundered with deadly irony in his tone. "How can they leave? How can they afford to ignore all this fun and go? If an entrance be charged," he began, then stopped, for in his condition he realized that he ought not to complete his sentence, which ran, "We might earn lakhs." He did not think it was a good statement to make. So he merely said, "Oh, friends and neighbors, the greatest service you could do us is to leave us alone." The neighbors grumbled a little and started moving out. On the fringe of the crowd someone was muttering, "When are they bringing the body?" Margaya never knew till now that he had so many well-wishers in the city. The next day they proposed to bundle him off to Madras. He seemed to have no choice in the matter. All sorts of persons, including his brother, sat around and said, "It's best that you go to Madras at least once, and verify things for yourself." "What for?" asked Margaya. The others seemed to be horrified at this question, and looked at him as if to say, "Fancy anyone asking such a silly question." "I can't go, I won't go, it is not necessary," Margaya said offensively. His wife had been transformed. She looked like a stranger, with her face swollen and disfigured with weeping. She glared at him and said, "Have you no heart?" "Yes, undoubtedly," Margaya said in a mollifying manner. He felt that she had lost her wits completely and required to be handled with tact. "If you have ordinary human feelings, then go and do something. At least, yes, I understand. But it's all over." His brother said, "Is this the time to argue about it all? You must go and do something." His sister-in-law added her own voice, "It's your duty to go and find out more about it. Perhaps there is still some chance of—" "But," wailed Margaya, "where am I to go? Madras is a big 129. World, where on earth am I to go there? He despairingly turned the postcard between his fingers. There is no address here. Nothing is said of where they have written from, nor who has written it. Never mind, they all said with one voice. Margaya felt now, more than ever, most unhappy to have been the father of Baloo. The duties of a father seemed to be unshakable. He made yet another attempt to make others see reason. Look here, if I go to Madras, where am I to go as soon as I get down at the railway station? Is this the time to go into all that? They asked, looking on him as if he were a curious specimen. This encounter left him no time to brood over his own sorrow. There seemed to be so many demands upon him, following the catastrophe, that it was as much as he could do to keep himself parrying all the blows. It left him no time to think of anything else. When there was a pause and his eyes fell upon a little object, the lacquer-painted wooden elephant that Baloo had played with as a child, it sent a sharp stab down his heart. It made him wince, he choked at the throat, and the tears came down in a rush, involuntarily, but he was spared more of that experience by the people around him. He almost regretted that his brother and his family were now back in the fold. They seemed to think up a new proposition for him every minute. And his wife, who seemed to be already crazed, apparently fell in with every one of their proposals. One moment they kept saying that he must at once make arrangements to get through the 10-day obsequies for the peace of the departed soul and start right away the performance of those rites. The next, they immediately said that he must go to Madras and try and do what he could. You want me to buy a train ticket this moment, and in the same breath ask me to send for the Purohit. At the mention of the word Purohit, his wife clapped her hands over her ears and wailed afresh. I never hoped in my worst dreams to hear that word applied to my darling. How can you be so callous as to utter that word so bluntly? Asked his sister-in-law, and another lady scowled at him. He felt irritated, but practiced gentle ways with a deliberate effort, fearing lest anything that he might say should once again bring a rupture between the families and continue it for another decade. He contented himself by saying under his breath, I don't seem to know what to say now. All the wrong things seem to come uppermost. They did not encourage him to go on with even that. 130. Reflection, but said, do something. Don't sit there and chat. This is no time for it. His brother added, if you are afraid to go to Madras alone, I will go with you. I know one or two people there. Here is this man, Margaya at once reflected, wangling a free journey to Madras. And the prospect of his brother's constant company for so many days appalled him. Lest the women folk and others should follow up the idea, he hastily said, don't worry, I will go myself. I don't want anyone to think that I am reluctant to go. He suddenly saw it as a beautiful opportunity to escape. His grief was unbearable, no doubt, but the atmosphere and the people about him made it worse. He saw himself being entangled with these folk for the rest of his life. That seemed to suit his wife, but he liked to be more independent. His house seemed to have lost all privacy. For the rest of their existence these people perhaps intended to sit around and wail over Baloo. At the echo of the word, Baloo, in his mind he let a loud cry escape his lips and he beat his brow. It occurred almost involuntarily, and at once brought his brother and a cousin to his side. No, no, not that way. If you break down and lose all control, what is to happen to the others? You must be in a position to give them strength and... How can I? Sobbed Margaya, moved by their sympathy. I prayed for him, and promised the gods his weight in silver rupees if he should be born. Did you fulfill that promise? Some asked, going off at a tangent. For that is a sacred pledge, you know. Margaya's wife answered, "Yes, it was done within an hour of his birth." Yes, these vows must be fulfilled within the shortest time possible. Otherwise the baby will acquire weight. How much did the child weigh? About 300 rupees weight at birth. We tramped to Tirupati, said Margaya, recollecting his pilgrimage with his young wife so many years ago. She had worn a saffron-dyed sari, had carried the infant on her arms and walked behind him, as he went to 10 houses and begged for alms. His pride would not let him beg, but it was once again his elder brother who bothered him by explaining, "The god at Tirupatha does not like anyone to visit him as a holiday maker, just for fun. He wants you to go there as a humble supplicant, in the attitude of a beggar." He had put into it all the weight of scholarship that he had acquired. That's the symbol, that's why you are obliged to visit at least 10 houses with a begging bowl, stand and cry at the door for alms, and then go on the pilgrimage, on foot, if possible. The god does not notice a person who goes to him in a holiday mood. And Margaya had clutched a brightly polished pot and, followed by his saffron-clad wife, had gone from door to door. "Give me alms." People had come out of their houses and dropped a handful of rice into his copper pot. He suddenly recollected now how amused he had felt when he saw his face in that burnished pot. Its convex surface distorted his nose and cheeks. It was so grotesque that he could not help grinning at his reflection, which made it so much more funny that it became impossible for him to maintain the gravity needed for the occasion. He remembered that 1 or 2 people had felt scandalized by the way he grinned when they came out to give him alms. His wife had pulled him up, but he held the shining pot to her face and she too burst into a laugh. He remembered how at that time he wished he could also amuse the infant. He remembered how he carried the alms and the sovereigns equal to the weight of the child to the Tirupati hills and deposited them all in the treasure box in the shrine. He felt he had done a good job, and it had been an enchanting pilgrimage. He sighed and groaned at the memory of his son. Through it all he remembered how he had not been a day too soon in weighing the youngster in gold, as he showed a tendency to grow heavier each day. That vow was fulfilled all right. Nothing wrong there, he said suddenly. He sat in a third-class compartment in the train to Madras. He had become extremely unhappy when leaving home. He told his brother, "Keep an eye on this house, will you?" He had told his wife, "Don't ruin yourself with crying. I will go to Madras and do what I can." It had sounded most futile. What could he do at Madras? Where could he go at Madras? It was all a very confused busy-ness. He felt unhappy that he was not even in a position to utter a promise. He bundled up a couple of shirts and dhotis into a small jute bag which had no clamp. It was to serve as a pillow for him at 132. Night. He had not traveled for years now, and he found it exciting. He wondered how he could leave his office. What was to happen to the business? Suppose somebody did something and killed his busyness? He wished he didn't have to leave at short notice. He wished he had had a little more time to arrange his affairs and then leave. But death gives no notice. They were bundling him about, and finally they thrust him in his bag into a jutta and sent him down to meet the 6 o'clock train to Madras coming from Trichy. He asked at the ticket window, "Will you please give me a ticket?" "What class?" he was asked. "Class. I am not traveling in a saloon. If there is a 4th class," Margaya pushed in his money for a 3rd-class ticket. There was such a crowd that he had to push himself in through a window, not an easy task considering the paunch that he was developing as a prosperous man. The compartment was no more than normally crowded in a railway system which issued tickets till the fingers ached. It was a compartment meant to seat 12, a conception in an ideal world. Perhaps it technically satisfied the rule because those who could technically be said to be seated were 12. The rest kept themselves in it, in all manner of ways, with their bundles heaped about. People sat on each other's laps, hung by cash others' necks, curled themselves on luggage racks overhead, spread their beds and stretched themselves comfortably in the space under the seats. One of them was explaining, "This is the best way of traveling. I have always thought this better than even the first class. I always come 2 hours before and spread my bed." Margaya had extreme difficulty in hanging his legs down because quite a lot of people seemed to be sleeping there, and he could not cross his legs because he had managed to secure only half a seat and had to dispose of the rest of himself somehow in midair. Seeing the manner in which the others had disposed themselves, he felt triumphant that he had at least got this seat, and he congratulated himself on his pluck. The moment he had shot in through the window, the impact of his arrival displaced someone who was already seated. Margaya just let himself down there before the other could recover. He was a villager. When he did recover, he cried, "Get out of my seat. Why don't you learn better manners?" Margaya said in his habitual masterful way with villagers. "I have been sitting here from Trichinopoly," the other began. 133. "Well, you must be tired of sitting. A change will do you good," replied Margaya. The others enjoyed the joke and laughed. Thick tobacco smoke hung in the air. Someone had opened even the lavatory door and forgotten to close it. Margaya cried, "Why does not someone pull to that door?" Everyone agreed with him that it must be done, but no one was prepared to risk leaving his place to do it, and the man nearest the door did not care to put out his arm for the purpose. The train, clattering and jingling, went its way, stopping at every station, where more people tried to force their way in through windows and doors, but those inside formed themselves into a class and were unanimous in keeping them out. At about 2 o'clock the fever in the compartment seemed to subside. People slept and wriggled in the positions in which they found themselves and snored. Margaya found a peculiar peace in these crazy circumstances. He had found a place for his neck, though not for the little bundle in his hand, which he closely hugged to his bosom. He was amused to see a seller of glass bangles, sitting right in the middle of the carriage with all his fragile merchandise tied up in a huge cloth bundle by his side, who kept warning everyone, "Be careful, sirs, don't knock on this," and people were very considerate. There was a little girl who was looking wistfully at the bangles through her half-sleepy eyes. Margaya felt drawn to this man and found out that he was going to a fair at a wayside station on the following day. "The day after tomorrow you will see me return this way without my bundle," he said. "But your purse fully loaded, I suppose," said Margaya. He liked the man as a prospective bearer of money. He suddenly felt that he had kept away too long from the thought of money. It was like a tobacco chewer suddenly realizing that he had been away too long from his pouch. Margaya took a pinch of snuff. At the sight of it a police officer sitting next him held out his fingers and Margaya passed him the box. The officer took a deep pinch, felt grateful and became communicative. "Things are not quite good yet, you know." Yes, of course," replied Margaya, thinking it best to be agreeable with a policeman in plain clothes. "All kinds of bothers," he said. "People will not leave us in." "Peace." Margaya looked about cautiously and said, "Can't you put them in their places?" "Yes," said the policeman. "That's what keeps me on the move." 134. Like this. My home is in Madras. but I don't get even a couple of hours a month to spend with my family. I have to be on the move constantly. Well, they think I have a nose for 4 wrongdoers, political, criminal, or whatever. Well, it's a dangerous job, I suppose, Margaya said, opening his eyes wide. The policeman adjusted himself in his seat more comfortably and said, well, it all depends how we view it. I have been in it for 20 years and have survived. Well, one must do one's duty, said Margaya, generalizing. As they say in Bhagavad Gita, God helps those who do their duty. The other leaned forward and said, do you know I had to carry a notice of arrest even to Mahatma Gandhi once? I would rather have prostrated before that man, but I had to arrest him. Such is life, he philosophized vaguely, sleepily. Margaya noticed his sleepiness and said, but they ought to give you a second-class pass at least. This tickled the policeman considerably. I can travel first, if I like. Nobody will question me. I am really an officer, you know. But what will be the use? I'm not traveling in order to sleep comfortably. That's why I travel third. My catches are almost all in a third-class carriage. Sometimes I have to follow political suspects, sometimes brigands, sometimes murderers, all kinds of things. They can assign me any job, but it is always necessary for me to keep wide awake and stay in a crowd. Most of the others in the compartment had gone to sleep. Only these two were awake. Margaya confided to him his troubles. I don't know where to go in Madras, or even what to do. Have you got the card with you? Asked the policeman. Margaya took it out of his pocket. The policeman examined it by the dim, insect-ridden light of the compartment. Looking carefully at the postmark, he said, it's from Park Town. Margaya asked, where is that? The inspector ignored his question, and asked, this handwriting must also be analyzed. He turned the card and said, how long will you stay in Madras? I don't know, Margaya said pathetically, refraining from adding, they have pushed me out on this journey. I don't know where I'm going. I would not even know Madras when I arrived there. The police officer took charge of Margaya as soon as they arrived. In Madras Egmore station, he took him to the waiting room and said, make yourself at home. There is the platform restaurant. You can rest as much as you like. I will be back. Give me that postcard. He spoke to a platform official about Margaya. Margaya began to doubt how far he ought to trust the man. Perhaps he would throw him in jail, or perhaps he was a brigand himself. He was gradually changing his mind about wanting the man's help. In the cold, morning light of Madras, things seemed different and more reassuring. There was a certain hopelessness in the dim-lit compartment, which made him want to confide in someone and enlist his sympathy. But now it all seemed different. He reflected, why not run away from here? Suppose he opened the door on the off side and cleared out. But the police officer gave him no chance. He said, taking him by the sleeve, don't move out of here till I come back. I will see what I can do for you. Oh, no, I wouldn't bother you, said Margaya, trying to withdraw. The other paid no heed, but just turned round and went away. Why should anyone be so considerate to a stranger? Margaya's devious mind kept ringing, particularly in this city, which is notoriously cold-blooded. After food, Margaya stretched himself on a bedstead in the waiting room and slept soundly. He snored so loudly that the people moving about the platform stopped and looked in. Margaya dreamt that he had got down at Mempi, and someone whom he could not recognize pointed up to the sunlit horizon, and said, all that is yours. Margaya was struggling to work up the interest rate on this proposition and was involved in a terrible quantity of figures, when the police officer came in again and woke him up. Margaya felt very apologetic for having fallen asleep. He said clumsily, "You see, I am sorry." "There is nothing to apologize about," said the inspector. "Well, if you like to have a wash, let us go out." Margaya got up and went round with him in search of a tap. The mattress heat seemed to prick him in a dozen places. He felt better after he emerged from under the tap. He went back to his room dripping, tidied himself up, and put on a long coat and turban. In the heat of Madras, it was like getting into steel armor and helmet. The inspector said, "Well, I have good news for you." He returned the postcard to Margaya and said, "I have spent the whole day tracing the author of that postcard. It's a falsehood he has writ." 136. 10. Margaya's mind was still clouded with sleep and calculations of interest. He looked dull and uncomprehending. The inspector held out his hand for a pinch of snuff. "Give me your snuff. It's very good, and I will tell you what you should do. You go back to your wife at once and tell her that your son is alive." "How do you know?" Margaya asked, still dazed. "Because we've managed to trace it back to the author. He is a madman in Park Town who keeps writing messages like that to any address that he picks up." "How did he pick up my address?" "Well, that's what we shall investigate, if you will stay for another day," said the inspector. The inspector took him along to a house in Park Town. It was a very big house in a lane, occupying the space of 3 or 4 blocks together. Its outside was painted green and red in alternating strips with oil distemper. Its front veranda was enclosed by iron rods painted yellow. The whole scheme made the house look like a crayon box with its lid open. Over it all was hung a board painted, "The House of Enlightenment." It was a hot, dusty afternoon, and the taxi had run through several winding lanes. Seeing so much gaudy color made Margaya's throat parched and thirsty. It also made him feel homesick. Before the car came to a halt, the inspector said, "I was able to trace this man through the post office. Don't be surprised by anything you may see or hear. We are going out to meet a madman, remember. He is a very wealthy man, gone mad. He owns a theater, and his relations are managing it." They got down. He knocked on the door. An attendant opened the door and showed the way. They went through several pillared halls. The pillars were of smooth granite and the floors mosaic covered. Potted ferns were kept here and there. Some parrots and miscellaneous birds were twittering in the cages hanging down from the ceiling. The house was so deep inside that the noises of the city came in from far off, completely muffled. The place was cool and shady. All along the walls of the corridors and passages and halls there were pictures of gods in terrible shape and fury destroying the world. Margaya felt he was in an utterly strange world. The world of Vinayak Mudali Street, of his wife and brother, and Market Road. 137. And banking seemed to be distant and unreal. The inspector whispered to him, "Don't you feel that you are in a zoo?" Yes, said Margaya, just to please him, although he did not know what it looked like inside a zoo. They were now in a large hall where a man sat on a divan, surrounded by cushions. He wore an ochre robe and had grown a beard. From 2 tall incense holders smoke was curling. The man had about him a heap of postcards, a pen and a writing pad. He was writing furiously when they entered. He had an attendant fanning him, although there was an electric fan above. There were 2 seating cushions along the wall. The man took no notice of the arrival of the visitors. The inspector whispered to Margaya, "Take your seat there." They sat on the cushions and waited. The attendant bent over and whispered into the ear of the big man. He put away the pen, leaned back and looked at the inspector. The inspector salaamed. The other's face relaxed a little, and a smile hovered about it. But the next moment it became rigid again as he said, "Who is that mortal next to you who does not seem to recognize us? Is it likely that we are invisible to his eyes?" "Yes, that's so," said the inspector. "That's the correct explainer." Tion. "Oh, it never occurred to me. I can make myself seen. We often forget that we divine creatures are transparent, and that we can not be seen, but it is easily remedied, if your holiness makes up his mind." The other shook his head in approval, then waved his arm, looked at Margaya, and asked, "Do you see me?" The inspector muttered, "Salute him." "Yes," replied Margaya with a reverential salam. "Now, what is your business, mortal?" The inspector said, "He has come after his son Baloo, about whom a card has emanated from here." He held up the card and said, "He wants to know in which world to look for him." The other shook his head and said, "That I am not allowed to say. That only God can do. I am not God, but only God's agent." He ordered, "Go and prepare the world for my coming." That I am doing. I write every day to every king, ruler, viceroy, president and minister in the world, that their boss is soon arriving, and let them get ready for it. Every day I write to President Roosevelt, Stalin, and Churchill, particularly. He indicated a big file of letters waiting to be posted. 100. The inspector said, "That's fine, but we want to know the whereabouts of Baloo. He is not a Maharaja or anything like that, and it is enough for us to know in which world he is to be found. Will you please look up the necessary reference?" "Is this his earthly father?" "Yes," said the inspector. "Does he believe in death?" "He does not," replied the inspector. "I am very pleased about it. It's my mission in life to inform at least 10 mortals about death each day and educate them. People must learn to view death calmly." Of course," said the inspector and added, "Please look into your file." The other took out a ponderous file, turned over its leaves, muttering, "Baloo. Baloo, son of Malgudi." Magaya could hardly believe his ears. He cried involuntarily, "How did you get my address?" The inspector suppressed him with a gesture and said, "Where did you pick up this mortal's address?" "How do I pick up George VI's address or Mahatma Gandhi's address?" he answered back. "Whenever anyone comes to me for charity, I will not give them an anna unless they give me their true address. Whenever anyone comes to me for employment in any of my businesses, I won't take him in unless he gives me his true address." "How do you know it is his true address?" "By writing a card to that address," the other said triumphantly. "You must not forget that there is God above me." "Did this boy come to you for employment?" "Didn't he? Or for charity?" "I don't believe in charity. Whenever anyone comes to me for charity, I give them employment. But when they come to you for employment, I give them charity," the other said. "Where is this Baloo?" persisted the inspector. "You may persist for 1,000,000 years, but you will not get a reply unless God sanctions an answer." "Hasn't he sanctioned it?" asked the inspector. "No," replied the madman. "In that case we are going," said the inspector, rising. The inspector walked away unceremoniously. Margaya hesitated for a moment at the door, and then followed the inspector out. "What are we to make of it?" asked Margaya. "Don't worry, your son is living somewhere. We'll have to find that out. We will do it, don't worry." "How do you know that my son still lives?" "Because I know this man. Every day he writes 10 death notices and sends them to the post. His servants usually do not post them, but your one card must have slipped through into the ordinary post. My misfortune is that he should have got at my address. Margaya wailed, suddenly realizing, it's 3 days since I went to my office. God knows what is happening to my business. Probably this is the beginning of the end, he reflected ruefully. The inspector took Margaya to the Central Talkies that evening. The manager rose in his seat when the inspector entered his room. The police were a troublesome lot and it was best to keep on good terms with them. The manager became elaborately fussy and cried, "What a pleasure! It's ages since you came here, Mr. Inspector. Shall I order coffee? The film is on now. Would you like to see it?" He was as proud of the picture as if it were his own product. Margaya sat in a chair, idly gazing on the pictures of film stars hung on the walls in sepia print. A stale, surcharged tobacco smell pervaded the air and made Margaya more bilious than ever. The manager said, "We are showing on the 26th. You must definitely send your children." The inspector waved off the invitation with a gentle indifference and said, "We saw your boss some time ago." "Oh. How is he?" "As usual, I suppose." "How does he manage the business?" "His son-in-law looks after everything. What he does is he comes round occasionally, sits through a show, notes down the names of all the people he meets and goes that he does once in a while." "Have you a new boy in your employment now?" Yes. We got one a few weeks ago. He seems to be an educated boy. Is his name Baloo?" "Yes, that's it," said the manager. "Why, anything wrong? Is he about 18? Asked the inspector, and gave a further description which the other accepted. 104. "What does he do?" asked Margaya, interested. "Well, miscellaneous things. Just now he is out with the sandwich boys. They will all come back before the evening show." They had to wait there till the crowd for the evening show began to arrive at the ticket window. A kettle drum was heard approaching over the noise of the crowd. It came nearer and stopped, and now through the gate streamed in street Arabs wearing sandwich boards, on which colorful posters were stuck announcing Krishna Leela. The boys were ragged street urchins with matted hair and sun-scorched complexions, covering their middles with loincloth and practically bearing on their bare bodies the sandwich frames. They put down their frames and gathered in front of the manager's room along with the drummers and pipers. Presently Baloo arrived, saying, "Payment only for 3, sir." The rest dozed off under the trees. At which the rest started arguing furiously. "What injustice to get work out of us and cheat us! Hey, you or no?" Over all this Baloo's voice rose, "You won't be paid for just loafing." His voice thrilled Margaya, but he checked himself. He feared that he might make a scene, or that his son might start to run away, out of sight once again, and then the inspector and the others might blame him for spoiling the entire situation. So he edged away towards a corner of the room and turned his face towards the wall as Baloo strode in. Baloo came in saying, "Manager, sir, we went through the People's Park, Rundle's Road, and Elephant Gate, and returned this way except for the 3 boys, the rest skulked away for a nap in Moor Market. You must teach them a lesson, sir." Margaya could hold himself in check no more. He turned and observed that the boy wore a dirty dhoti, his cheeks were sunken, he was dark with wandering in the sun, and his hair was uncut. As he later explained to his relations, the moment he saw him he felt as if he had swallowed a live cinder. In this state he rushed forward with a loud cry, some indistinct words coming out in a rush in which the only clear words were, "Is this spectacle my fate? Is it for this I prayed for your birth as my son? What has come over you?" His face was wet with tears. The boy was taken aback, so were the other 2. The inspector had credited Margaya with greater self-possession. A crowd gathered at the door. The cinema goers viewed this as a free show. The inspector lost his temper at the sight of the crowd, and going up to the door, shouted, "Get out of this place." He stood at 141. The doorway, and Baloo felt that his retreat was cut off. He surrendered without a word. The officer saw them off at the Egmer platform. Margaya gripped his arm, and once again there were tears of gratitude in his eyes. He said, "You have been like a god to me. Tell me, if there is any way in which I can repay you, write to me. You know my address." "Oh, yes. This is the first time I got at someone who was not a dacoit or a knave. I am glad to have done a good turn," said the inspector. He told Baloo, "Be a good son. Don't be a bother to your parents again. I have told the railway police to keep an eye on you." It was this part that Baloo did not like, and later commented after the inspector went away. "What can the railway police do? I'm not a thief. If I want to give them the slip, there are a dozen ways." The inspector had got them comfortable seats in an end compartment which was not too crowded. All night Margaya plied his son with questions and tried to know what he had been doing with himself ever since his disappearance after the results, but the boy sullenly declared, "I won't speak of anything. Why couldn't you leave me alone? I was quite happy there." But, have you no affection? Don't you want to see your mother? I don't want to see anybody." "But my dear boy, do you know what it will mean to them to see you back in the flesh?" Your mother broke down completely. "Why couldn't you have given me up for dead? I was quite happy seeing pictures every day. I want to be in Madras. I like the place," he said, already feeling dull at the prospect of living in Malgudi. "What are you going to do with me? Make me read for exams, I suppose?" he asked next. "You need not go near books. You can do just as you please," said Margaya indulgently. He was filled with love for his son. He felt an indescribable pity as he saw the dirty, greasy dress and the famished appearance the boy had acquired. He became absolutely blind to all the dozen persons packed into the compartment. He hugged his shoulders and whispered, "You eat, rest, and grow fat." 142. That is all you are expected to do, and take as much money as you like. The boy seemed to accept this advice with 100% literalness. As one supposed to be returned from the grave, he was treated with extraordinary consideration. His mother, he found, seemed to have become an entirely new person. She looked more youthful. A new flush appeared on her shallow cheeks. Her eyes had become very bright and sparkling. She became loquacious and puckish in her comments. She took the trouble to comb her hair with care and stuck jasmine strings in it. She seemed to feel that she was born anew into the world. She spoke light-heartedly and with a trembling joy in her voice. This was a revelation to Baloo. He had never thought they attached so much importance to his person. He enjoyed it very much. His mother plied him with delicacies all the time. He had only to take a deep breath and look for his mother, and she at once asked, "What do you want, my boy?" Baloo found that he had returned to a new home. Everything now was different. His father left him alone according to his promise. It was a very agreeable situation for all concerned except Margaya's brother and family. The moment Baloo was brought back home, their position as the helpers of the family disappeared. It was a relationship essentially thriving on a crisis. The moment that the crisis was over, the two families fell apart, and they were once again reduced to the position of speculating from the other side of the wall what might be happening next door. Margaya's wife ceased to bother about them. Baloo never knew that there had been a momentary friendliness during his absence. On the day he arrived with his father, When he stepped in and saw his uncle and the family in their central hall, he was speechless. His uncle demanded, "What have you been doing with yourself? What is all this?" And his aunt and the children of the next house surrounded him and gaped at him. He felt abashed. He simply moved into the little room at the side and shut the door on the entire gathering. That was the signal. When he reopened the door, the house was cleared and the front door bolted. Margaya briefly announced to him, "They have all gone." 104. Where? Baloo asked with interest. "To their own house," Margaya said, and added, "What is their business here, anyway?" His wife chimed in, "They probably wanted an excuse to plant themselves in here again." Margaya did not like to contradict her or say anything so utterly ungracious himself, although the moment he had secured his son, his first thought was to tell his brother's family, as diplomatically as his nature would permit, that they might go back to their house and resume their avocations. This he said very gently when the occasion came. As Baloo shut himself into the small room, his brother wanted anxiously to know what had happened. He said, "Did I not tell you to go to Madras, and then it would turn out to be good for you? Here is this fellow," Margaya reflected, rubbing in his own wisdom and judgment as usual. He hated in his brother the "didn't I say so" tone that he constantly adopted. It seemed to him a very irritating and pretty habit of mind, and so he retorted sharply, "That's all right. Nobody doubts your wisdom." His brother ignored this sting and asked, "Well, where did you find him? What was he doing? Who wrote that card?" Margaya lowered his voice and said in a whisper, "I will tell you all that later, when the boy is out of hearing. Now I had better attend to his wants." He moved towards the street door. His brother took the hint. He cast a glance at his wife, who got up, herded the children together and started out, telling Margaya's wife, "I have so much to do at home, I think. Anyway, let us thank God for this recovery," and marched out. The moment the door shut on them, Margaya's brother's wife ground her teeth and said, "Even if this house is on fire, let us not go near them again." It was a sentiment which was not approved by the last but one toddling beside her. "Why not, mother? It's so nice being in that house." "Now what has happened for you to make all this fuss?" her husband asked. There were tears in her eyes when she went up the steps of her own house. She said, "I only want you to have self-respect, that's all. After all that we have done for them these 3 days, baking and cooking for them night and day, 5 seers of rice gone for those ingrates. After all, she was the only person in their house. You have included the feeding of your own children," her husband said, which enraged her so much that she stabbed his cheeks with her fingers, screaming, "Go and lick their feet for love of that wonderful brother of yours. You will do anything for him, I am sure."